welcome to another episode of War Here to Superhero. We are in the superhero battle room. You already know my name. You know what I go over and do. So we don't need to go worry about me. We're going to worry about Sam Caballero. And if I hacked his last name like I do to most people, he will correct me on the end. So I get to learn a little language skills each and every time I do one of these episodes. So he is a military man who served his country a very long time. I actually got to meet him when he came out to Dover Air Force Base. I had somebody connect me and him together, and now he serves our communities through leadership and learning. So now he's a fully vested veteran, and I'm hoping to get a little closer to there and learn some lessons on the way as you're learning too. So we're going to bring Sam onto the stage. Hey, Sam, do I have you?
I'm right here. How you doing?
Doing good, doing good. So, all right, we're going to jump into the little of the past to start this conversation because we already know you're that future veteran, which I'm hoping to be. So, what inspired you to join the military many months or moons ago?
Oh, well, many moons ago, my my dad came to the kitchen one day as I came back from work. It was late at night, and he was telling me, "Hey, you and your mom have plans, and they don't include you." I had just graduated from high school. It had been about a year out, and I was like, okay, I see where this is going. So the next day I joined the Marines. And when I came back home and I told my parents, my mom just died literally on the ground. And I thought to myself, maybe that wasn't a good idea. A little bit of backstory was that I was going into my second semester of college. I was not doing good. As it is, the first semester was not good. And this was community college. So I knew I needed something. I just didn't know what I needed. And I had heard about the military, of course, because my dad was in the Air Force and I was a military brat. And I kind of made the point to myself that I would never do that. But
Hmm.
then, never say never, because it bit me in the behind and I realized I needed it very much. And so I went back, told the Marine recruiter I wasn't going to do that. I hadn't signed any paperwork. He said, "You can't do that." And I said, "Oh, yes, I can." And so I knew I wanted to go back to college. So I decided to join the reserves. I had heard through a friend of mine about the reserves and National Guard, but I felt a special calling to the Air Force Reserves. And so I went to speak to a recruiter. He provided me a list of different positions. I picked one, which was a heavy equipment operator, Red Horse. Go
Wow.
Red Horse. And so I decided to do that. And the summer of 1990, a day after or day before Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, I
Hmm.
was at Lackland Air Force Base, Texas, and my first day of basic training. At first was crazy, but at the end, I knew I needed it. And years later, I go back and I realize how important that moment or that time in my life was for me.
Hmm.
So that's how I joined the military.
I have a sub question with that. I was thinking, so we always hear people say, where were they at during 9/11? Do you, since you joined a little earlier than me, did people think of that? Like, where were you when Saddam Hussein attacked Kuwait? Do ever people ever link that as a memory at all?
Not as strong as 9/11. So they link that time because back then, we didn't have cell phones like we have them
Mhm.
today. So when the newspaper came out, and then of course the 6 o'clock news came out, then it was a big headline. But at the same time, most Americans at the time really didn't understand the Middle East other than Israel and Lebanon and some other distant place. They just knew that there was just one place in the Persian Gulf, and whether it had any impact to them or not, that was another question. But ultimately, nah, for them, it was just another day.
Mhm.
But when at the time President Bush, the father, came on television slash radio and talked about how this area would impact us both socially and economically, then it started to make sense. But then when we committed to freeing Kuwait from Iraq, well,
Mhm.
that was different. That was different. So not as much, but still there was an impact that most Americans had.
Yeah, I think I remember there was a lot of TV of the Persian Gulf. lot of green screens because I guess it was night vision. I didn't know that at the time. I just thought it was like old TV, and you see these, hear about Scud missiles and everything else and launching and whatnot. So it's just very interesting that like most of my veterans always remember when they're at 9/11, but we don't remember where we're at when like the Persian Gulf started. Or if you think about O.J. Simpson and the trials and all these different world events, but it's always seems 9/11 was shaping. It's either they've been in and then they remember when the military drastically transformed, or they go over and they came in after the effect of 9/11. So I was just curious because that is a world event. And I got to go to Kuwait as one of my last deployments, and they showed us all the destructed hangars and everything else. And I guess to this day, they're still working with France to sue them for the whole thing. And they do these homey G patches that looks like I don't want to go in this building, but I guess they build a building into a building to leave the destruction. And I don't know if it's still repaired to this day. I don't. I just know when I went there in 2011, it was like, why are all these hangars still destroyed? Like, nope, we're still having France and we're going back and forth to it's their fault, it's our fault, all this stuff. And it just, they never fixed them.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see what the aftermath is, even years later. So,
Yeah, were you part of like after basic training, did they send you off to Kuwait or the Persian Gulf or anywhere?
no, we did a lot of support Red Horse and getting the locations ready. So we would go to various different locations to get the bases ready because basically we were construction. But then a few years later, I had heard that there was a need for military training instructors, and so I applied. And at 21 years old, I was one of the youngest instructors there. I mean, before there were young instructors, but barely 21, I was now wearing a campaign hat, um, marching flights.
Wow. Wait a minute. You weren't there between 2000 and 2001, were you?
I was. I was assigned to what used to be the 8050th military training squadron, which then turned into the 604th and then the 433rd military training squadron. So as a reservist, I was there for the most of my career. It's all the way up to 2009.
Wow.
And that's how I actually got my start in learning and development was my time as a military training instructor.
Wow.
So I
Did
didn't
you
actually go to college to become an L&D. I learned everything I knew up to a point as pounding the pavement.
so you could have been my MTI. Wow.
I could
That's a
have.
man. So all this psychological trauma I have could be from I'm just
I wouldn't want to say that. And of course, you get to a point in your career where you realize that that kind of action or behavior of the TI is actually not productive. It's counterintuitive and counterproductive altogether. So many learning lessons on my part as a young TI,
mhm.
and then of course realizing that all my learning lessons, I would then instill that into the instructors I was training, especially
Mhm.
when I started seeing them leverage their their um, their ugly side, if you want to call it that, in
Yeah.
terms of turning into that whatever to make somebody do something they don't want to do, putting fear. And yeah, some of that is okay at first, but at the end of the day, it's just simply maltraining, maltreatment. There's other ways to inspire, influence, and motivate a new trainee in a way where they are becoming productive, realizing who they are and recognizing what they can do. And then you hope that they instill that into the people that they influence, inspire, and motivate.
Yeah, totally different modality. When I came in, it was Senior Airman Michael Green and Senior Airman Michael Rogers. You might know these names now. And they were, it was October of 2000. It was October 3rd to November 17th. I remember the days. The third day I got in, because I'm the bouncer, I'm flat footed. Oh, yeah, they called me out. They're like, Trainee Faust. I'm like, "I already knows my name. It's only the third day." Man, it was, I remember like even them ripping my 341s, telling me it does snow in Texas because he asked me that after I let the wrong guy in, did that whole green, one military green ID card. senior airman Michael Rogers. It was Michael Green, and I called out the wrong name, and I got to learn that it snows in Texas. So those were my experiences. So that's really interesting that you were learning these types of things and growing up, seeing on what worked in the past, but now crafting to the present, because a lot of us veterans, it's a hard pill to swallow when we have these new trainees and you see the videos now and you're like, I'm used to my soul being ripped and then I got built back up. And now it's more like motivation, captivation, and then inspiring. You know, did you see over time, did you get more productive people? Did people were more effective as airmen as they gone as you guys changed that modality?
I think overall, when you look at the 70 something years of history at Lackland Air Force Base, I think it goes through peaks and valleys. There was a time recently where there was definitely a valley where there were some challenges. With that said, I know for me personally that the key of inspiring, influencing, and motivating is to learn who you have in your flight, to recognize who they are by name, what's important for them, why they joined, what role did they play, mother, father, son, daughter, uncle, aunt, and then something specific about them. Now you have 60 airmen in a flight.
Mm,
And from day one, of course, you have your facade. I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm going to hold you responsible. I'm going to engage you. I'm going to connect with you. And I have a job to do, and that's to train you. I'm not here to be nice, and I'm not your flight attendant, if you want to call it that, but I am
mm,
your military training instructor. And I will hold you accountable, like I said, but I want you to trust me. I want you to have the confidence that you can come to me with a problem, a challenge, an obstacle, so that we can figure it out together in terms of what those next steps look like. But I would see my peers and colleagues leverage tools that were not productive and treat, in essence, people with an extreme level of disrespect. And
mhm.
of course, now, what does that airman think about that TI, that training instructor? Years later, what's the legacy of leadership does that person have of that person in their mind? And recently, I was at the BX picking something up, and I get tapped on the shoulder. And it was an airman with his son, who his son is now about to graduate. And he
Mm.
was so proud of showing and introducing me to his son, but he was so ecstatic that, are you Sergeant Caballero? And I was in your flight. I mean, he was just bouncing off the wall and ceiling. And to me, that spoke volumes of my approach, like I say, modus operandi, your mode of operation in terms of how are you going to gauge, connect, and interact. And so we connected on LinkedIn. I'm super excited
Wow.
and proud of his accomplishments and his achievements. And so, yeah, it just goes back to your modus operandi. What was it that you leveraged and utilized in the way that you engaged, connected, and interacted, in essence, trained those flight members?
Yeah, that's an amazing transformation. I don't know if I could have processed that as an 18-year-old getting out of college. And I mean, yeah, I had college too. I went to a community college, but you were trying to get degrees and I was failing through degrees. It's a bit of a
Oh, me
difference.
too. Me
Oh,
too.
okay. Yeah, because that's the reason why I left to go in the military, because I was like, work was more exciting, college was difficult, hard to focus, and then didn't know I was ADHD and autistic back in the day. I only found out just last year about this. So it's a big eye opener now on how learning and modality goes over and works. And when I met that TI, for me personally, I needed Jesus and God used him to motivate me to Jesus. I literally ran to the chapel that first week. And then they had a Bible study, and then they had fellowship, and then they had the service. I was going 3 hours on Sunday. I was religiously recruiting. And I wasn't even a Christian yet. So for me, I'm kind of glad he had that bravado with me and everything else. Now looking at hindsight, but I think, yeah, the modality doesn't work long term. I think for certain people, certain parts of their lives, I needed that discipline. I needed that structure. I needed that person that was far away. Because if I had a friend as a TI, like if I could relate to him in that way now, I don't think I would ever submitted to the authority. For me, I needed that person that was like that. And it was actually helpful. He became real one time with me because, again, I couldn't march worth a darn and everything else. So I became a road guard. And then at the end, when we went to honor flight, he pulled me in the office privately and he became human. It was a little weird. And he's like, hey, we're about to go into flight and everything else. I don't want to prevent you from marching, but are you wanting to go over and do that? And I said, I'm going to sacrifice for my flight. I said, I know we'll get written up like crazy. They'll be like in that honor flight 1, 2, 3, 4, because I can't keep. I'm actually flat-footed and plantar fasciitis, so they actually got 0 demerits. So, and I knew if I was standing in that flight and marching, I always lost and missed steps. So for me, that was the first human moment I had with him. And then that was it. And then it all just faded away. So after that honor flight and everything, and they marched, the last couple of days went by real fast, and then he kind of faded to the wind. So it's really cool to hear that you have those moments with those people and they made memories and positive memories. For me, it made it more like it was more sanctifying memories. That's what I'll call it. So with that, sounds like you served a long time. We talked about many moons. Like, how long were you in, and when did you actually leave?
I joined one, or I think it was around 1 April of 1990, went to basic training 1 August of 1990, and 1 November of 2024, that was my day of retirement.
Ooh.
So I served about 34 years and some change as a reservist, always a reservist. Now, in those 34 years, I did serve active duty wise on orders, long-term orders here and there, whether it was a TI for sergeant or my recent role as a senior enlisted advisor at the Professional Development Center at Air Force Reserve Command. And so
Mm,
that was an awesome time too, because I was able now finally to marriage my civilian side of what I do with my military side. And the other thing too to keep in mind about reservists is that we're not unnecessarily on a career path or track.
mm,
You're really autonomous in terms of what your next steps look like, because you can stay in a position for years
mm,
versus active duty where it's every 3 or 4 or 5 years you're on the
mm,
road, you're moving to a new base, and depending on did you make rank or not, um, you're not going to be successful unless you're mobile. But
mm.
for reservists, it's a different show or different situation. So for me, I pretty much maintained a career at Lackland or Randolph here in San Antonio, and then my final time was at Warner Robins in Georgia.
Yeah, because you know my friend Lieutenant Colonel Sprigworth, and that's how we met.
Right.
And that is the interesting thing about career. Me and him kind of both stalled, and it was one reason or another. So I met him as Pete first, and then I found he was a lieutenant afterwards. So kind of that fraternization rule. Oh, it was like a couple days later, literally, because I thought he was a Mister or a contractor. Found out he's a lieutenant. I'm like, oh, after that. So we grew up. I was A1C. He was a lieutenant. Interact sometimes, and then he parted ways. I parted ways, and then I ran into him on a deployment. Like we intercepted one another, like even just for a few minutes and everything else while we were going between places. And then I got to interact with him again. When I went down to Warner Robins and everything else and whatnot. And you're right about the career. So E1 through E5, active duty. You kind of have to chase the rabbit in a sense. And then when I got eligible for E6, and I became a Christian at this point, I've been a few years and started really seeing the tyranny of the urgent. And they're like, oh, you need to go get E6. You need to go over and test. I said, why? For $50 a month, 160 to 200 hours? I was already thinking semi-entrepreneur. I'm like, why am I going to get it this early in the game? So I studied, but I didn't study hard, and I didn't make it during active duty. And then when I got to the reserve, you get promoted for weird things. I'm not sure if your promotions happen this way. My E6 promotion happened this way. I had a chief go over and come in the room. Stood up to give him respect. He's like, Faust, you have a 7 level. I said, I've cross trained tons of times, sir. I have plenty of 7 levels. He's like, I like you. He promoted me next month. I didn't get it for merit. I didn't get it for like I was doing amazing things. He just liked me and I had a 7 level. Those were the literal words. So, and then I got E6. And then when I tried to get E7 at Dover, it was over. I had 8 opportunities happen, and it was one reason or another. I didn't fit the structure, but other people can really burn through the ranks. So me and him, he's made a decision because of his family to go and get to a certain point. So he's probably going to retire as lieutenant colonel, and that's it on the officer side. But for enlisted, yeah, we can either wait a long time to get the promotions, or like for me, I'm retiring as an E6. So it's very interesting, the pendulum in that. But I am seeing it shift just a little bit. They're trying to now utilize the position descriptions and different things, and now they're trying to do rotation. I heard they're even trying to do rotation for the arts. Like once they get this new model, and they're going to say, "Oh, well, we can rotate your position," and I'm like, "What? I got hired as a civilian." So it's going to be very interesting. But I do agree that you can, especially if you're an art or a traditional reservist, you can either promote really fast, or you could be that senior airman E4 mafia. Did you see that throughout your career? Is that type of thing? Like you saw some fast burners and then some people that stayed in the E4 mafia?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it also is not immune to the reserves. I mean, you see it in other organizations as well. The worker bees who just want to keep on working, and then all the rest who just want to keep on growing. So it just depends where you're at. And also, I would say that um, the career field itself, it depends on where you're hanging your hat. I know in some fields there are a lot of fast burners, so it just depends. But I found that for me, I could just stay put in one spot, but I also knew that I couldn't be here if I wanted to make rank. And not to say I wanted to make rank, I did want to progress into a senior NCO role, but I had
Mhm,
lost my skill level. So I knew that going back to Red Horse was not going to be in the cards.
mhm,
So I decided to do something different for my career, and that was to become a first sergeant.
mhm. Yeah. So were you last time I met you, were you a senior or a chief when I met you during that time?
Oh, I had already made chief.
Okay, yeah. I'm only seeing the senior behind me, so it kind of throws me off. I meant, yeah.
Well,
So,
the reason why I've got that up there was because it just reminded me of my growing moment as a senior first sergeant. I had quite a bit of challenges that I helped people with as a senior master sergeant, first sergeant.
mhm,
Drug abuse and spousal abuse and financial challenges, and um, so I have that set of chevrons up there was because I learned a lot as a first sergeant, not in my time as a master sergeant, but as my time as a senior master sergeant as a first sergeant.
yeah. So let's go into that pivot, because when I met you, you were talking about that pivot. You were getting your business up and rolling. What major transition? Because I was like, I'm going to say April, May timeframe you were up there. I'm trying to remember the exact time frame, but I knew it was roughly about 6 to 8 months before November was coming. And you were like, hey, I'm going to go retire. And me, I'm like, I was wrestling with it too. I already had my retirement catalyst party and everything else. Everybody thought it was weird about that. But what made you make that transition to make it to a transformation? Because it's one of those things, you had an amazing role that was in there, but then at the same time, you're a traditional reservist. So what made you now to make that transition to a transformation?
Well, because I had no choice. So
Mhm,
uh, I have about 20 something years in talent development. I've worked with different organizations from Burger King, the city of San Antonio, Chevron, Centers for Disease Control, and I've been in various different learning and development positions from coordinator, manager, director, and in my career, I had been reorganized 3 times. And that is the unfortunate disadvantage of being in learning and development is
mhm,
that when budgets start to get crunched, what goes out the door are your non-profitable accounts. And of
mhm,
course, HR and training are not. profitable. They actually
Yeah.
take and they require a lot of money. So I was on vacation in Portugal when
Mm.
I was shopping, and my boss called me and told me that my position and my team had been eliminated. And
Wow.
this was 6 or 7 January. I remember very vividly. And I
Mm.
remember coming out of this shop, stumbling upon this amazing plaza in downtown Lisbon called Plaza Rocio.
Mm.
And after the phone call, I noticed this intricate design of the surface where I was standing. And I looked up as I followed this intricate design, and I noticed this incredible square, bustling, busy, lots of noise, and I just started walking. I didn't know where I was walking to, but I just started to walk. And of
Mm.
course, that there's a drill movement. And I don't know what came upon me, but I decided to give myself left flank. And that requires you to pivot on the ball of your right foot. So I pivoted. Not only did I physically change my direction, but I also mentally changed my direction.
Mm.
So fast forward, told my wife, my kids, because we were all there in the square, went to a local church, just started to pray, recognized that I needed to do something different. I
Mm.
didn't know what, but I knew I needed to do something different, and that if I'm going to continue to engage with corporate America, it needs to be in my terms,
Yeah.
just as
That's
much as
huge.
theirs. And so I got on the plane, had to transition over in London to Dallas, and in that time period, I also started feeling sick. And
Mm.
remember, this is 7 January of 2020.
Mm.
So then when I
Oh.
got home, I was on off my feet for about 30 days. But
Wow.
in that trip or on that flight and on my fifth screwdriver, I started to realize that I think I'm ready to do something. Now, when I got let go of Burger King, I would get calls from franchisees asking me for help. So I had already had my EIN number. I'd already been established as a business, but I kept it moonlighting because I had my day job.
Yeah, of
But
course.
when I got home, I decided to start to think about what I wanted to do, and that's how Pivot In came to be. Pivot is a direction you want to take. In to what degree? And so I have helped hundreds of people when it comes to what their next steps are, whether it's in leadership coaching or doing an engaging workshop. That's how I help people in what they want to do for themselves. And so now I'm now found my calling, and my calling is to help people help themselves.
Because that's huge. That was for me. I think my pivot moment. I did my retirement catalyst party April 6th, 2024. I'm a numbers guy. I'm a big numbers guy. So again, about 147 days left, and then I'm out at October 18th. And I was at Hill Air Force Base. I don't know if you're familiar with training managers, but there's a guy named Senior Sergeant Gaskins. He's done a lot
Oh
of different
yeah.
things. So now he's going down to Africa. And I was there that week, and I finally got to meet somebody that could school me. I've been a training manager for a long time, and I've had people call me. And it was the first time we started talking, and we're both old enough. So it's kind of like when I'm talking about retirement, it's like people thinking that type of stuff. And I sat in his office, and as he was teaching me things, and then we took a break, and I'm like, what am I waiting for? And I was praying for the Lord. I'm like, what am I waiting for? So I clicked it 18 October. I didn't do a flanking movement and everything else, and I love doing those, but I had to do that mental shift in that particular guard. And then I call it the POTUS effect. So months later, the POTUS came into office, 2025, and he has changed everything. Fear came on to me, and I decided to go in and through prayer and everything else. And I think it's more fear/prayer. We decided we were going to pull it back. And we actually then got told just about 3, 4 weeks ago, They're like, no, we're not going to reverse it. We know that you need to pivot. They didn't say that, but they like, you need to follow your calling. You need to go over and to do this type of stuff. So that was our moments in that particular regard. So you actually help people wrestle with that. What if they don't know they have a pivot moment? Do they have to have a clear pivot moment in their mind, just like you and I had, like you out in Portugal going on doing a flanking movement in the middle of a square, or having that click and everything else? Or did they, what type of client are you actually looking for in the pivot? Because I meet a lot of people sometimes from the prayer room to the boardroom, they're not there. So what do you look for that person or that company that you're helping with?
Well, everyone has a struggle. Everyone has a challenge, or like we say, everyone carries a cross.
Hmm.
And so when that occurs, I don't know what that is. And in some cases, some people don't know what their struggle or cross is.
Hmm.
But what's powerful is an open ended question. And they start usually with what, when, how, who, and where.
Hmm.
And being mindful of a why question, because you don't want to put people in defense when you ask them, why did you do it this way? Or why do you want to do it this way?
Hmm.
But what's clear is that when you ask someone about what's important to you, when do you want to start? Who do you want to engage in? When do you want to do this? How do you want to get there? Then this is where many start to recognize and realize for them what their next steps are, where
Yeah.
they want to pivot to. And there could be pivots on all kinds of different situations and circumstances, but ultimately the person that has the answer is them, not
Hmm.
me. I don't have the answer. All I can do is engage and connect and utilize the power of an open-ended question
Hmm.
to help in terms of what their next step looks like.
Did it take you a long time from when you started Pivot to getting up and rolling to get that full throttle? I'd like to expand on a little bit of the journey, because even on everybody's pivot, they might be ready and they have the questions, but for yourself, like when you took that pivot, how long did it take from you to actually make that a reality?
Well, coming off the plane, spending 30 days on the bed, I
Hmm.
knew what I brought to the table, which were engaging and interactive workshops.
Hmm.
And then I also loved to connect with people and help. But see, this is where a lot of us make mistakes as leaders. We approach help and support by advising and telling people what to do or what they should do for themselves.
Hmm.
But the challenge with that is that when you tell somebody how to solve their problems, it's not innate. So that
Hmm.
means that whatever solution that is on the table, it really doesn't belong to them. And if it
Yeah.
doesn't belong to them, they're not going to be empowered to do or use it at all. So that's how I got introduced through coaching. And a
Hmm.
wonderful friend of mine helped me with the process of getting certified as a certified coach. So
Hmm.
I'm certified with the International Coaching Federation. It
Hmm.
takes about a good year through the training as well as you actually coaching people and being recorded and evaluated so that someone can come back and say, Sam, you probably could have asked this question versus that. You should allow the time, the silence to let them think. So it is a skill that for a lot of us it's difficult
Hmm.
to sharpen, but you can. And so I've been certified now going on 6 years as a certified coach. And like I said, I've helped hundreds of people, and they could be emerging leaders
Hmm.
to those who are recognizing what their next step looks like in their senior years. So I don't have the answers. They do. We just need to find out what they are.
Yeah, and that's really cool. I think that's probably one of the most hardest things is we as humans to actually be quiet and to quiet our minds. I know for myself, I we did a Bible study yesterday and we were talking about like great books to go over and read. And one of the things that limit us is this. And I told him, I said, I'll be honest. I said, I'm on here like 7 hours a day, like intermittently. And I'm having to go and lock myself in that particular garden. I think that's a skill set in itself when you're talking about being quiet. And it's not just sitting in the quiet for the person to go over and discover. We have to also quiet our mind in getting away from that type of stuff. Has your coaching had now thinking of that, has your coaching gotten maybe easier or harder since we've gotten into that generation? Because you're trying to be quiet, but are they sometimes, have you ever seen that they're so inundated with all the other stuff that sometimes you might not come to a solution because their mind is so cluttered?
What's interesting is that when you ask somebody a question, first off, there is something that happens in the brain when a question is asked. A question's now on the table, and it's directed to you.
Mhm.
And most like to be asked a great question. What's a great question? A great question is simple, open-ended, and it's not stacked. It's clear
Mhm.
and it's poignant. And in some cases, it may be profound to the point where it allows for one to dig deep in terms
Mhm.
of what's in there for them. And then for the listener, for the coach, you do have to train your skill of being able to actively listen and to train the ability to minimize your squirrels and the phone and anything else that could disrupt your ability to make that mental connection with
Mhm.
the client, with the coachee, like we call them. Because as soon as they may say something, it may pivot me to putting myself in their story, which then hijacks me and my ability to connect in terms of where they're at with their story. And now I'm lost and I'm trying to play catch up to where they're at in their dialogue. So, as a coach, there are multiple things that one has to engage in terms of their skill level, in how they ask questions,
Mhm.
how they listen, how they respond, their mannerisms, and all the other informal things in how we communicate.
Yeah, it seems like it's a huge ordeal to go over and to take on. Wow, that's just, whew. I think that's a lot to even to go over and to process in those moments. Hmm.
It is, but if you have a calling, and like they say, the vocation, and vocation, what's interesting about that word is that it comes from the word vocare, vocal, which means, are you called upon to do this? And I felt, especially when my friend reached out to me, who's an inspiring Christian of herself,
Mhm.
when she and her and I started to engage, I felt like, you know what? I need to unlock that door. I need to go and cross the threshold, and I need to see for myself if I can do this or not. And there were times where I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can steadfastly listen to somebody and not put my own perspective on it, but just take it in for what it is worth. That is hard, but not impossible, so long that you are determined to do it.
So to kind of sub question, but kind of pivot to one of our main questions is that when you were doing this, and this was sounds like it was initially difficult, how did you get through those tough times to then become that good coach, to not spin it in maybe your direction, give them what you thought, and able to actually help them unlock that? So how did you take that tough time and that transformation to actually do that? Because I personally think for myself, it's so difficult not to take your own persona, your motives, your values, your personality, your intellect, and your past associations, and not just say, hey, go over and do this. And then you do. You either get lost in the sauce in the story, or you go over and you don't give them what they need.
Well, I have a 25-year-old and a 21-year-old. That means that when they were young, we would watch a lot of Pixar movies. And one particular movie was pretty profound for me. I mean, all of them have a message, but Dory, or Finding Nemo, is a movie that has a quote which is, keep on swimming. Now, what does that have to do with anything? When you're struggling and you're challenged and you're finding yourself in a situation where I just can't anymore, for me, my super fuel my ability to empower me is to go back and say, I can take another step. I can pivot to the left or right.
Mhm.
But it requires that little piece of energy from the hips. Remember how when we would train left flank or
Mhm.
about face or face, that you need that little power from your gut, from your waist.
Mhm.
And for me, I just felt like it's okay. And I just recently had another experience for myself. So right now I'm in school. I am in the second to 4 classes to finish up my doctorate. So I've been
Ooh.
going to school since 2020, and I'm on that final round around the track.
Mhm.
And I am currently on page 19 of a 20-page lit review for my topic.
Mhm.
And there are times where I felt that I can't, oh my God, this is too much.
Yeah.
But one sentence turns into a group of sentences, which turns
Mhm.
into a paragraph, which then turns into a page, which then turns into your lit review.
Yeah.
One step, pivot. That's my superpower.
That's really cool. And I think it almost reminds me of the movie, trying to remember, not A Few Good Men. What was the one? But the Navy diver with Cuba Gooding Jr. and they have a guy and they're doing the 12 steps. God, I have the whole thing in my brain. I can't remember the name of the movie. But it reminded me like he had to do those 12 steps and he just had to take one at a time. And I think he had that outside motivation. And so when you think of Finding Nemo, he had to have that internal motivation to find him. But I think also sometimes you got to have that external motivation to keep going. And I think that's what your coaching program does for the rest of us. Because some of us can be motivated internally and keep going and pushing forward. And then other of us need that coaching. So, and that's, I think, a really cool thing that we just have to know ourselves in that particular regard.
When you when you realize that everyone has emotions, everybody. What's an emotion? Well, when you remove the E from emotion, you have motion, movement. And what's interesting is that the E actually stands for energy. And energy can be happiness, sadness, confusion. So, what energy is moving you?
Mm,
Here's the other thing, too, that's interesting about motion. Those are the first 2 letters, which is mo.
mm,
And mo derives from a Latin word, which is movere, which is to move. What moves you? What allows one to be able to be motivated to get up from the chair and take simply one step? And that's the challenge because a lot of us, we go from the moment we get up in the morning to the moment we go back to bed, not realizing about the little things out there that spark the fuel necessary for us to make that movement.
yeah, I don't think a lot of us do intrinsic thinking to go over and get to that point. I know for me, it took me, I had like four major things happen in my life. It was brother's death, parents' divorce, sexual molestation, and then almost divorcing my wife in 2014, June 1st. It was on her birthday. And then it took all those years. So I'm like 33 years old at that point, 32, 33. And it was then when my wife spiritually kicked me in the you know where hours later because I did it over the phone at an IT job. This is after I got out of active duty. That's when I finally got motivated to start looking at things intrinsically. I guess, yeah, I never thought about the mo part, like what motivates you in that particular regard. And it wasn't much. It was always external things pushing me, externally things trigger me, allow circumstances to come, and circumstances made almost every decision. I never was motivated until I was about to have a brink of a divorce, and that was going to be another legacy of a Faust family destroyed because that was the Faust family thing. Everybody I have is divorce or death. That's all it was in that particular regard. And it took that to go and motivate me to go over and change. So that's very interesting in that particular regard. I think that is very powerful that we need to think about more in that particular regard. So let's
And
say
that's
you go. Sorry.
that's why one of the things that I do is, I ask for my clients, my coachees, the people that I support, what are those core values that you carry for you? And what's interesting about the word core is that it derives from the same word that we get corazon, which is heart. So in your heart, what's the three things that you feel that every time that you struggle or are challenged by, I can go back to those things like integrity, excellence, honesty. And then with what you have in your heart helps with what knowledge do I have in the mind? Because then that connection will allow my feet to move. But once again, taking that moment, a walk in the park, a sit at the bench, or maybe just simply closing your eyes at your desk and recognizing and realizing what that is for you. And, Daniel, we have all had our C's, our significant emotional events in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And we could either put those in a position where they continue to inflict us in a
Yeah.
negative way, or to leverage them in a way where they're reminders of who we are and what we can do with that in terms of our next step. But once again, it's not about hiding or ignoring, it's just leveraging it in a way that helps us and pivoting forward.
And I think that also makes us decisions on things I think we should be looking at more as an individual, and then as a couple, and then as a family, and then as a business, and then what businesses we apply to. Like right now, I know integrity is one of my values, and it's not because the military told me so. Excellence in all you can do. That was never one of those things for me. I'm like, I just do the best I can. So that one I never agreed with. Service before self, that one became because I became a Christian. That wasn't because of the military. But as we go into these places, like, yeah, we do need to know our cores, because then I think we sort of do. Like, we'll watch a TikTok or anything else. Nothing bad against Dave Ramsey. I'm not saying anything negative per se, but I resonated with him when I was young, and now me and him would butt heads as a mold, because his core values on things, as I hear these reels, they're not my core values. So I know for me, if Ramsey Solutions pops on an Indeed page for an application, I probably won't apply, because I know at least seeing his core values, I would not resonate to work in those places in that particular regard. Was that also the thing for you? Like when you got that reorganization let go, was that when you started to look at your core values? Because I know for me, when I got resigned, and it was a merger, it was two companies merging and they deleted my position. And I worked until like 7 a.m. in the morning, and then they called me 2 hours later. Um, I didn't have that core identity thing. Was that for you during that time when you had that? Were you starting to see that they weren't aligned anymore?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And remember, life is like a journey. And when you're in your 20s, things are important and things are not important. And then when you're
Hmm.
in your 30s and 40s, and now I'm on my 50s, there are things that are important and there are things that are not important. But what's clear is that, are you cognizant enough to recognize what that is? Or are you so overwhelmed by the phone and the squirrels that it prevents you from being able to be cognizant and to reflect deeply within oneself and recognizing what's important and what's not? What I like about the Air Force core values is that it's a start
Hmm.
for, at the time, 19 years old, and being told about these three core values. I was like, well, what does that all have to do with me?
Hmm.
Well, then when you start to engage with them and recognize what they are: integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do, Then you start to become familiar in how they resonate with me
Hmm.
and how they resonate in the environment I choose to participate in. And then through the years, you start to realize, wait a minute, that's important, but so is this. To
Hmm.
be methodical for me is important. To be accountable, that's important. And for me, how I do things, how they relate to each other, how I need to focus now as I get older that I'm not leveraging so much energy here versus there and that I'm
Hmm.
efficient. I have smooth in there. And what does that spell? Sam. But it allows me to remember when I'm struggling. All right, Sam, is this smooth? Is this holding you accountable? Is this methodical in your approach? No. Okay. Now you know your answer. Now you know what flanking move you need to be doing right now.
Yeah. And I think that's huge. And I think this would tie to my last question because when you're working with people and when you're thinking about yourself, you have now your, it almost sounds like your three tactics that you decide almost everything that you go over and do. So I want to either think of your 19-year-old self, as you mentioned earlier, or if you want to think of your clients or even think of yourself right now, what would you either tell yourself or tell one of your clients to go from that survival, just rat race, doom scrolling, doesn't understand their core values type person to someone that's thriving and knows how to make those decisions to make that next pivot?
Looking back, I see 19-year-old Sam lost and hungry and realizing what he just did for himself. He still doesn't understand the big move that he just made, the big investment that he made for himself.
Hmm.
And now that I'm about 7 months out from retirement, looking back, where would you be right now at 54 in your career, in your life? I, I can't even imagine where I could be. But here's the three things, the tactics that I learned both from my military career and in my civilian career that continue to gift me with so many wonderful opportunities and times where I look back and I'm so proud and glad about those moments. First off, engage with a curious heart. I found that curiosity is also a skill that you can turn on. And what's interesting about the word curious is that we derive it from the same word that we have for cure, which means that if you're struggling and turning on your curiosity quotient, remember, human beings, we're all fixers. We want to fix things. So get out there, work hard, fix it, but drive your curiosity. Because the second thing that you got to do is in our lives, we pick up habits, we pick up things that whether they control us or not. But what I have found to be so helpful is to try to keep your mind free of the gutter, of obstacles, of gaps. What's wrong with approaching something with a level of curiosity as well as a level of open-mindedness? I remember taking a trip to Mexico. I was invited to participate in this entrepreneurial program, and they started bringing out plates of different foods. Some foods I recognize. This one plate called escamoles, I did not recognize. And I thought to myself, I don't know if I can eat that. Well, I tried it and it was good. Escamoles is a combination of tomatoes, onions, cilantro, and egg with carpenter ant larvae. And it was good. And
I
I
didn't,
have
I didn't,
have
I
had it
thought
again.
mussels.
No, there's a reason why they call it Mexican caviar,
Hmm.
and it is really good. It's good. The last thing is keep those feet moving. what I mean by keep those feet moving is agility. I have found that just like muscle, when you don't work it out and you're stationary, you start to feel numb. And I don't like feeling numb. I always feel like I have to be on the move. Now, does it mean I have to be moving 100% of the time? No, it doesn't. But it just says that I gotta be in a position where I'm not growing roots. I'm mobile. So those three things have helped in my growth, my pivot, and the continuous pivot that I see for myself that the good alert above me is gifting me every day.
That's really cool. That is really cool. Sam, I want to thank you for coming over and joining on our show. Thank you for the time that you go over and give. I'm going to give you the floor one more time if you want to talk about more about Pivot In or give a call to action. Close it out in any way you want, but I want to thank you for joining, and now it's your time to shine.
I would just say, Daniel, thank you very much once again for this wonderful opportunity to allow me to share about what does it mean to pivot. And we all have our C's, our significant emotional events. But what are you willing to do to take a step forward, to pivot left or right, wherever you want to go, and to what degree? So once again, thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity. If there's anything that I can do for you, please let me know. Do follow me. I'm on LinkedIn as well. But I just want to say thank you. And once again, pivot on.